Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another reading from J.B. Priestley's English Journey. I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, and this is my live that I try to do every morning at 9:30 while we've got the crisis on. And I was thinking about other books to read when we get to the end of this, and funnily enough, I've just ordered another copy of the English Journey, a slightly bigger one, a hardback, because the pages keep falling out of this copy that I've got this morning. Hello to Audrey, hello to Lisa, hello to Fiona, hello to Philip, hello to the lovely Julia, hello to Graham. Nice to see you this morning. Welcome aboard. Hope you can hear me all right. Yeah, bit of pain this morning. Worse actually than yesterday. Don't know why, but hello Ringer Joe. Nice to see you there. Yeah, a bit grim this morning. I have wedged myself into this chair with a cushion, and I daren't move really. I lay on the floor earlier, which helped yesterday. Then this morning I couldn't get up. So we'll see how we do. I've actually got different degrees of pain. I have taken some paracetamol, and I can feel it searing through my back. So if I suddenly have to stop because it's too much, we'll see how we do. But it's lovely to see everybody. About to go out for a cycle ride. So have a nice cycle ride. You lucky beggar, don't pull a muscle is all I can tell you. Don't pull a muscle. That's how I did mine. So I may not be able to persevere, but it's funny, I was all right just until I went live. Isn't that funny? I've now trying to just ease my body into a place where the muscle is happier. I've tried doing some stretches. I've tried lying on my back. I've tried all sorts of things. We're on chapter 7, ladies and gentlemen. Hello to everybody who's just arrived. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming along. If you've got a bad back, try some sit-ups. Yeah, thanks. Try some sit-ups. I can barely get up, let alone sit up. Thanks for that. We're on chapter 7 to the Potteries. I haven't managed to reread this beforehand because I've just had a very odd morning. But anyway, we'll read this blind and see what happens. The thread of my journey was waiting to be picked up again, and I found it in the Potteries. I didn't want to leave my old home, but it was not unpleasant to be once more in a district entirely unfamiliar to me, to begin with a mind like a blank of a sheet of paper, to be a stranger and a sightseer and a noodle asking questions instead of a man back home wondering whether it is he or the town that has changed. I carried with me to the Potteries a full load of ignorance. I knew that cups and saucers and plates were made there, and I had some acquaintances with them in the form of the 5 Towns in Arnold Bennett's novels. And that was all. Though Bennett, I think, told us a good deal about his birthplace. Oddly enough, I do not think I heard his name mentioned at all the time I was in the Potteries. In a yearbook of the district, several years old now, that someone gave me, there were thousands of names mentioned in it, but I never caught sight of his. Very odd, this. There is a great deal in this yearbook about the products of North Staffordshire. Surely Bennett and his excellent novels deserve a place among those products. And what single man in our time did more to make the Potteries known to the rest of the world than Bennett did? In this blathering yearbook there is not a single town councillor or territorial officer or secretary of an angling association who is apparently not regarded as being more important in the district than one of their best contemporary novelists. The visit of any empty bigwig matters more to the editor of this compilation than Bennett and all his works. Why was Bennett not made a freeman of Stoke-on-Trent? in this matter of free men, the city seems to have a passion for colonial premiers. Why no sort of memorial to him anywhere? And why are third-rate politicians in this country still considered to be more important than first-rate artists of any kind? Is it because there is always a chance the politician may be able to wangle something, whereas no real good can come from artists? I wonder if there is a country in Europe in which musicians, painters, authors, philosophers, scientists count for less than they do in this country. In this public indifference to the fact that we have so many men of genius, unlike those small countries which go to the length of regarding their occasional men of genius as public benefactors. Well, I read that bit wrong. I do not think it is. I think it's the result of our general lack of intellectual curiosity and our zest for art, and our trick, very noticeable in public life, if no longer so obvious in private, of cherishing large members of the empty bigwigs mentioned above, men who have never done anything in particular but are vaguely important, imposing figures decorated like a Christmas tree with medals and orders and stars. You would imagine that the shrewd democratic industrial provinces would never allow themselves to be taken in by such inflated personages, and I do think they do more, and I do not think they do any more in private, but they still do in their public official municipal life, where they still hardly condescend to notice the existence of artists or scientists. This is, however, by the way. Has anybody read anything by Arnold Bennett? I feel he's an author I should have read. Nigel Sadler says, celebrating Dr. Alex Moulton. Fair enough. The famous designer of small-wheeled bicycle and car suspension systems, notably in the Mini, 100th birthday, sadly died 10 years ago. So, yeah, okay, that's cool. Yeah, if anyone's read any Arnold Bennett, what would you recommend? I'd be interested to know that. Once in the Potteries, I met a friend who asked me to stay with him at the house of some relatives of his. This worked very well, not because I was plunged at once into a friendly, comfortable atmosphere, I imagine quite unlike that of any hotel in the neighbourhood, and the Potteries must be a grim region for the casual visitor, but also because my host happened to be the managing director of one of the firms in the local industry and could act as a valuable guide and informant. The house I stayed in was just outside the industrial district, and indeed was very pleasant country. My host himself, though a capable and very hard-working man of business, is at heart, I suspect, a country gentleman eagerly awaiting the day when he need not go to the works every morning, but can ride and shoot and take his dogs out and look after the things in the neighbouring village. There are a lot of men like him in this country, members of the educated, technical middle class, excellent at their jobs, but who long to be rid of them, and only keep on working until their children are educated and off their hands, after which they retire completely and happily in the country on a small income. They're all pleasant, sensible fellows, and I cannot yet decide whether they are ruining us or keeping us sane. Anyway, this is no way to offer thanks for several days of the friendliest hospitality. This district, Bennett's famous 5 towns, consists of 6 towns: Burslem, Fenton, Hanley, Longton, Stoke and Tunstall, which have now been merged into one city called Stoke-on-Trent. This city has a population of nearly 300,000, but it has no real existence as a city of that size. There is no city. There are still the 6 little towns. After federation into one city had been first suggested, the inhabitants of these towns argued and quarrelled most bitterly for years. Finally, the obvious advantages of federation carried the day, and there appeared, on paper, the mythical city of Stoke-on-Trent. But when you go there, you'll see the 6 towns, looking like 6 separate towns. Is that still true? Is Stoke-on-Trent now still 6 independent towns? Anybody know? Or have they all, with urban conurbation and stuff, become one big town? I'd be interested. Unless you are wiser than I, you will never be quite sure which of the 6 towns at any given moment you're in. But at least you'll be ready to swear that you are nowhere near a city that contains 300,000 people. There is now a civic centre in Stoke itself, but even that will not persuade you. For what distinguishes this district to my eye and mind is its universal littleness. Everything there is diminutive. It's a word to say, isn't it? Diminutive. Even the landscape fits in, for though there are hills, they're all little ones. I seem to be paying a visit to Lilliput. The region is a clutter of small towns, as I've already remarked, but inside these towns, everything is small too. Not a single thing sends you staring upwards. The pottery manufacturers, locally known as pot banks, have nothing big about them, no 6-storey factories or towering chimneys. You see no huge warehouses, no high public buildings. The houses, which stretch out in a ribbon development for miles and miles, are nearly all workmen's cottages, and if they're not actually small of their kind, they contrive to suggest they are. Down one road I noticed some cottages and tiny bungalows that boldly labelled themselves Commercial Hotel, and I will swear that in any of them the arrival of 2 travellers at once would have wrecked the establishment. I cannot believe that in any part of England such preposterous dolls' houses have passed as hotels. And unless I'm sadly wrong, unless I am so dominated by this idea of littleness that I could not use my eyes, the very people are small, sturdy enough, of course, and ready to give good account of themselves, but nearly all stunted in height. Even the smoke, and there's plenty of it in the Potteries, doesn't hang well above the towns like a dark cloud, as it does in other industrial districts, but it seems to drift heavily just above the roofs. Never before have I seen such a Lilliputian region. It is a marvel to me that the cups and saucers turn out to be the right adult size. How about that? I have read J.K. Rowling. All right, okay. Thanks, Charles. We're talking about Alan Bennett, who is of some period in the 30s, I imagine, and probably the 20s. Wikipedia doesn't say that it's formed, just that it's formed from 6 towns in 1910. Oh, there we go. I love the fact that people are doing the research as I read the book. I apologise if you can hear the washing machine in the background. It's just on spin at the moment. But there comes a point when a man has to wash his smalls, no matter how many they accumulate. It resembles no other industrial area I know. I was at once repelled and fascinated by its odd appearance. Perhaps it was all more curious to me because, being a Yorkshireman, when I see so much grimy evidence of toil, I expect to see huge dark boxes of factories and the immense tall chimneys with which I am so familiar. Here, however, although there was more smoke than I had ever seen before, so that if you looked down upon any one of these towns the drift over it was so thick that you searched for the outbreak of fire, there was no tall chimneys, no factory buildings frowning above the streets, but only a fantastic collection of narrow-necked jars and bottles peeping above the housetops on every side, looking as if giant biblical characters, after a search for oil or wine, had popped them there among the dwarf streets. These, of course, are the pottery kilns and ovens, which are usually tall enough to be easily seen above the rows of cottage houses. I never got used to their odd appearance, never quite recovered from my first wild impression of them as some monstrous oriental intrusion upon the English industrial area. But without these great bottles of heat, there would be no Potteries. They represent the very heart and soul of the district, as you very soon learn, And unless you are prepared to take a deep and lasting interest in what happens inside those ovens, it would be better for you to take the first train anywhere. This is no region to idle in, and the pity of it is that, what with the decline of the American trade for the better class china and the triumphant competition of other countries in cheaper lines of earthenware, so many good workmen here, men who have learned a fine old craft, are compelled to remain idle. This is not a place designed to comfort or compensate such idlers. I do not know what nature originally made of it, because nearly all the signs of her handiwork have been obliterated. But man, who has been very thorough here, has not made it anything that remotely resembles an inland resort. For a man of the Potteries, it must be either work or misery. For the man who is in regular work at decent wages, there is some definite compensations, as I shall presently try to show. But as a district to do anything but work in, it has nothing to recommend it. Doesn't sound like a very great place. The Potteries, it sounds, I've never been to the Potteries as such, and it sounds very romantic, doesn't it, Potteries? But obviously in 1933, with all that smoke, not so. Probably not as much smoke there now at all. To begin with, it's extremely ugly. You see open spaces everywhere, fields, the local people call them proudly, but these are no Arcadian pastures to be idle and poetical in. You can, if you are young, kick a ball about on them, but they cannot be fit for much else. I have seen few regions from which nature has been banished more ruthlessly, and banished only in favour of the sort of troglodyte mankind. Civilised man, except in his capacity as a working potter, has not arrived here yet, just as the real city of Stoke-on-Trent, which will no doubt be a moment of civic dignity, has also not yet arrived. The small towns straggle and sprawl in their shabby undress, following the ugly fashion of industrial small towns. They're neither old and charming nor bright and new, but they give the impression of having been hastily put up 70 or 80 years ago, like frontier outposts or mining camps, and then left to be sooted over. Their excellent services of buses, which have replaced the actual trams, but not always the tram lines and posts and wires, simply take you from one absence of civic dignity and urban gaiety to another. He doesn't like the Potteries at all, does he? These 6 towns are not exactly alike. Even I could see that there were differences, but these differences are minute when compared with the awful gap between the whole lot of them and any civilised urban region. I do not mean to suggest that there are not schools and museums and shops and cinemas and those public halls in which musicians can indulge their passion for oratorio, beg your pardon. The amenities exist and may be as plentiful per head as the population as they are in any other place. But the general impression is of an exceptionally mean, dingy provinciality, of Victorian industrialism in its dirtiest and most cynical aspect. The look of these places bears no proper relation to the work that goes on in them. It seems to me monstrous that good craftsmen, whose families have been working for generations, perhaps with Wedgwoods or Adams or Spode, should be condemned to live in such miserable holes as these. It would not seem so odd if they were all making excavating machines or dredgers or torpedoes. But they're not. They're shaping and colouring things like cups and saucers and plates and vases. That anything even vaguely decorative should come out of these places seems like a miracle. That a craft, perhaps the most ancient one known to us, should still be carried on here is incredible. It's as if nobody had any eyes to see outside the workrooms. The men of the directing and managing class can, of course, slip into their waiting cars and return home. That is, in a pleasant country, from which the Potteries are only seen as a distant haze. The others are doomed to live in one or other of these 6 towns, and no doubt when they are working hard, life is not so bad. But it must be a sorry business for them when they are thrown out of work or compelled to retire. What compensation are there here? The green fields and the bright streams have gone, and the real city, which would at least offer something to the eye and mind, some suggestion of dignity or gaiety, an amusing stir of life, has not yet arrived. We shall be told at once, of course, that they are used to it, and after all, this is their home. But what a grim progress, getting used to this. What a home! Ouch! Certain amusing traits of Arnold Bennett's odd but engaging character, his knowing air, his passion for excessively smart cosmopolitan ways of life, his delight in being in the swim, were always explained by the fact that he was very much the Provincial come to town. The explanation never entirely satisfied me, because so many English authors, perhaps the majority of them, are also provincials who have arrived in town, and yet few of them shared Bennett's boyish enthusiasm for all that was metropolitan, fashionable, anything but provincial. The very first morning I spent in the Potteries gave me a clue. Coming from this part of the world, Bennett was not merely a provincial, but a super-provincial. He perhaps in reality he fled, from a region that contains the very essence of remote provinciality. Though the Potteries lie between and no very great distance from Liverpool and Manchester in the north and Birmingham in the south, though they can communicate easily with nearly any other part of the country, occupying as they do an almost central position, there is something so self-contained about them and their peculiar industry that they convey a most unusual impression of provincial remoteness, an impression heightened by their odd littleness and shabbiness. You feel that nobody comes to the Potteries, and nobody, except Arnold Bennett, has left them. The same firms, none of them very large, though several, of course, are famous, go on from generation to generation, through a century of employing workmen from the same families. There is something to be said for this cosy personal sort of industry, as I shall indicate later, but this too helps make the district self-contained, and to confirm in it whatever kind of life it has adopted or made for itself. And now it may be reported upon me that obviously the people who live in the Potteries like this kind of life, however unlovely it may seem to a hasty visitor. Otherwise they would be restless and not show themselves so willing to leave it. But what roots with them there? Sorry, just a little bit of back pain there, spiking up through. Just got to find that magic sweet spot on the back that switches off that pain. But what roots them there, I suspect, is their work, their ancient craft, which so far I have been able to carefully disengage from the general way of life there, the thick drift of smoke, the huddle of undignified and little ugly towns, the row of dingy dolls' houses, the narrow streets that lead from one dreariness to another. If Bennett had been either a master potter, or on the one hand, or a thrower or jollier on the other, probably he would never have left his 5 towns, and we should have had a few more of good pieces of and we should have had a few more good pieces of crockery, but not The Old Wives' Tale or Riceman's Steps. Presumably, The Old Wives' Tale and Riceman's Steps are novels by Arnold Bennett, which are quite famous. Has anybody read any of those? I'm not sure that they have. In short, the Potteries are not worthy of the potter. If you are working hard there, then you are not too badly off, because, as we will see, the work is frequently good work in which a man can take personal pride. But if you're not working there, if the depression in America or the triumphant competition of the cut price countries has thrown you out, then God help you, for nothing that you will see or hear or smell in these 6 towns will raise your spirits. We'll pause there for a second because I need to have a sluicy of water and I'm in extraordinary pain. Extraordinary pain. Mr. O'Connell says, as a point of interest, I've downloaded an app called BirdNet. It's amazing and it identifies every bird song that you can hear in your garden and local park. I can't put it down. Oh, that sounds fantastic. Leslie Couch, good morning. I'm very late today. No worries. Nice to see you there, Leslie. Thank you for coming by. Aaron Lucas says, Kia ora from New Zealand. I am originally a man of Kent. I came across your channel. Thank you for reminding me of the wonderful history I love and miss so much. Do you know, it's welcome along, by the way. It's amazing how many people who have left the country and are in other parts of the country, for whatever reason, do tell me that. And I do wonder why people have gone, because they love the country so much, but for whatever reason they have. Sorry, I'm squirming in this chair because of back pain that I have from this pulled muscle, which does not seem to want to get better. And I'm struggling to find a position, oh, that's a bit better, where I can support the back and still carry on, as is my want. Les Jarvis, good morning, and apologies for the late arrival. I don't understand it. You know, if I can make it out of bed here for 9:30 and read to you with all the pain in my back, I don't understand what's going on. People are probably just enjoying the snoozing in and the lovely going out in the garden and having a cup of coffee and embracing the world. And I don't blame you. Why would you want to sit in front of a screen and listen to my babbling? But of course, many people, hopefully, are not necessarily watching, but are just actually listening while sitting in the garden enjoying the countryside, which would be lovely. We have 31 people watching, and we're not that many. I can't remember now how many subscribers we are from the 10,000. And when we get the 10,000, we're going to throw a party. You're all invited. I will make space in the studio that just about get 10,000 of you in here. And we can raise a glass. Might not be able to do it initially for a while because there is a bit of a crisis going on in the world. You may have noticed. Right, I should try and read just a bit more. And then I'm going to have to stop because of the agony that my poor old back is in. Les, you don't have to try hard at all. I'm just being cheeky, as is my way. The first place I went over was not an ordinary pottery bank or pot banks, but belonged to a firm engaged in one of the new specialised branches of the industry, chiefly in making what is known as electrical porcelain, insulators and insulating fittings. Oh, that sounds great fun. The range of these things was enormous, from tiny switches and the like, no bigger than a waistcoat button, to great insulators, some of them bigger than a man, for the grid. I wonder if his Bakelite, I wonder if there's any of that old Bakelite stuff being manufactured there at that point in time that we, all out of porcelain, which is fascinating because we would use plastic now, wouldn't we? Maybe we should go back to some of this and not use the plastic. That would be quite good. All these articles have to be made with extreme care, for as parts of elaborate fittings, they have to have exact measurements, perhaps to the hundredth of an inch, and they must retain, under great stress, all their insulating properties. A bad job could cost an electrician his life. It's no joke doing delicate and intricate engineering with baked clay, which is what this business amounts to. For most of the people engaged in it, excluding the technical men in charge, the actual work here is not so interesting as that in the factories I explored later, where the domestic and more decorative earthenware and porcelain are manufactured. Nevertheless, the first thing to report is that all the people I saw at work here, from the experts down to the scores of girls busy with the small moulds, seemed to be enjoying themselves. It was as cheery a factory as I have ever seen. I saw no sullen robots about. They all looked both brisk and contented. One reason for this, I firmly believe, is that clay, of which, after all, we ourselves are said to be largely composed, is cheerful, companionable stuff. As they will soon tell you, it has life in it. Not so much life as wood has, perhaps, but a great deal more than most substances have. The earlier processes of this work were some of the same as those elsewhere, so I will leave them until later. But the method of firing was different here, for instead of being baked in the great bottle-shaped kilns, which you see peeping over the chimney pots everywhere, these things, when they're ready to fire, were stacked on a small and very slow train that crawled almost imperceptibly into the long oven. In the middle section of this oven, there is a terrifically high temperature. You can take a quick peep at the furnace through small holes here and there, and what you can see in there would inspire the sermon of many Christian divines. The insulators all come out the other end, a few hours later, done to a turn. I was fascinated by the method of testing them. There is a special room for this, and inside this room is a small glass-sided chamber where the insulators to be tested are linked together in an electrical series. The door is fastened, and the young man in charge, thoroughly enjoying himself, yeah, I bet he isn't, begins turning switches and pulling down handles. When we were there, he put 75,000 volts through the series, and I stared through the window at those unfortunate insulators, wondering all the time if the whole weird business would suddenly jump out of control. Inside, there was a ferocious cracking, and violet lightning played all around the insulators. Apparently, if there's a flaw in one of them, the thin chain hanging below is broken. At least, I believe so, but I must confess I'm very vague about these technicalities. It's no use my saying I am a child when electricity is concerned, because nowadays children seem to be born with the faculty for comprehending high tension and low tension and voltages and amperes and watts. I will say that I know as much about electricity as the average Asiatic peasant. I do not try to be dense about it, but there's something inside me that refuses to learn, understand, and remember. Needless to say, the insulators were given the very severe testing, being put to the stress well beyond that of their final work. While I was still recovering from the cracking and violet lightnings, the chief electrical engineer of the firm caught me. There was a gleam in his eye. It seemed, was mere baby play. Would I like to see their new big transformer at work? I didn't know what a transformer was, but I have a vulgar or perhaps childish mind, and as the whole thing was big and new, and as he spoke of it with such obvious respect, I said there was nothing I should like better. So we went across to the Powerhouse, or whatever the place is called. It's in there, I think, that they test these giants, and one day, if they are not careful, they will shrivel up the whole Potteries. This Powerhouse was, as I shall now as I now persist in calling it, was a very austere place, with very little inside, but what there was inside made you feel uneasy. It would have served excellently as a film set about a film for the future. Actually, I suppose it represented the immediate present better than most places, and it shows how fast things are moving, how hopeless it is our trying to catch up with them when we feel that something that is essentially of the present looks like a glimpse of the future. This electrical engineer and his two brisk and cheerful young assistants we found in the Powerhouse were men of the present, in a sense for which I, for example, am not a man of the present, but only a man trying to catch up. They had that look, that happy absorption in their work, that passion for explaining and demonstrating, all of which we find in these men, essentially of the present, in electrical engineers, motor car designers, aviators, wireless technicians, and the like. Geeks, I suppose we'd call them now. This is their age, and they are completely at home in it, unlike the rest of us who are desperately trying to make ourselves at home in it. This queer building was their proper setting. Its very austerity, I suspect, was typical of their new world. We stood on a small balcony, and at the other end was some very strange apparatus, in which the most notable and exciting objects were two big copper globes. They suggested magic, not the old, messy alchemist's wizardry, all happening in a stuffy, crowded little place, but magic brought up to date, clean and bare and glittering. There, it appeared, was the big, new transformer, capable of raising the power within a few minutes to 500,000 volts. It would perform for my benefit. Huge blue blinds were pulled down and the lights were turned out. They shouted, "OK!" at one another. And on the little balcony, now hanging over the intense gloom, it was not altogether OK. What were 500,000 volts? And could they be turned on and off like so much bath water? And what if the big copper globe decided to do something that it had never done before? It was all right for these other fellows. They were servants and masters, or at least colleagues of the power in there. But I was a stranger and ignorant. Suppose it took a dislike to me? There was a noise, and it was the god stirring. They had roused him. The violet lightning flashed again. But now not only was there more of it, but the lightning was a deeper violet, and further removed from the colouring of this world. There was a gathering fury behind it now. I have never heard a noise that carried with it such a suggestion of enormous power. It was not loud, but somehow it bored into your ears. You felt that you could have split town halls with it. There seemed a possibility that this building was being split, and that your unearthly violet light was glaring through the cracks. I had been warned that when the voltage reached the necessary figure, the current would jump the gap between two movable copper globes. Now it jumped. 500,000 volts, blue lightning, all over. The god retreated. The god retreated, muttering, and we blinked at each other in the honest daylight again. There was talk of lunch. While the others were being technical about the transformer, I told myself that though these fellows here and all over the world probably knew what they were about, this trick of stirring up the violet hot god, making him give a performance and then hurrying him out again, was very sinister. They would do it once too often. Some morning there would be one gigantic blue flash, and the whole industrial Midlands would look like a smoking dustbin, or even more like a smoking dustbin than they do now. There is in front of us, we are definitely in for, an electrified world. It will be filled with cheerful young men in overalls, looking all alike and smoking the same kind of cigarette, and they will play about with millions and millions of volts, until one of them, having just quarrelled with his girl and being a trifle absent-minded, will pull the wrong lever. Astronomers out of Cirrus way, being perhaps shaped like gigantic crabs, will note a disturbance in the solar system. I hurried with the others to the firm's dining room. I thought, let us lunch while we can. I love that. I love that. I will pause there. I love it. This book is just brilliant. I just love it. Yes, the world will be electrified. And here we are, using that electricity to communicate in a way which I'm sure J.B. Priestley could never have possibly conceived. Amazing. They still use ceramic insulators in the grid. Do they, Graham? That's amazing. I would say that he has put out his back, says Ramiboo. I'm really beginning to think he needs to see a doctor over this. He doesn't seem to be getting any... You're talking about somebody who can actually read the words. I am still here, you know. Audrey says, an aesthetic peasant is the name of a blue and white pottery pattern. Oh, is it? Oh, that's interesting. Bring back the dimwits. And Nigel Cooper, Richard from Charles. Woo, Julia has a wrench. There you go. Anyway, that's my reading this morning. Thank you so much. Absolutely love this book. This is such an amazing book. And my aim, once we're out of all of this, kick someone just to make a point, says Rusty Butt Bucket. What? Kick someone just to make a point. Once we're out of this, I am determined to follow in the footsteps of J.B. Priestley and visit these places, reread those chapters or take the essence of those chapters and present a series of videos. It would make it a fascinating thing to see 90 years later. That's 1933. So we're 2020 now. So let's say I do it next year, 2021. So, you know, just under 90 years. It would be fascinating to do that. Steve G says, I'm trying to read the complete works of Charles Dickens, but find it very heavy going. Oh, gosh, yes. Some of Dickens' stuff is very heavy going. And you do kind of say to yourself, get to the point, man, get to the point. Hard Times I read a couple of years ago fairly. And it was great, but it was hard going. Ramiboo says that would be very fascinating. Bye-bye, Richard from Charles Richardson. Thank you. Bye-bye to you. Yeah, no, it would be fascinating to do that. It would be really interesting. And comparing the good and the bad, that, you know, obviously there's good and bad changes, like everything. Rusty Butts, LOL, say, Richard, didn't think you would see that. Oh, I see everything. Good luck, Steve G. I find Dickens hard going too. Yeah. Some of these, the thing is, our minds are quicker, aren't they? We do want people to get to the point. And I suppose with people like Dickens and Thomas Hardy that take you very slowly, the plot unfolds very slowly in many ways, and the descriptions are fascinating. But I guess we have references now that they didn't have back then. We have so many film references in our head, and we can see things very quickly. So that when you're writing something now, you don't need to describe everything because you can hint at what it looks like. And we're already filling in the blanks because we have all those references from previous books that we've read, but also feature films, and potentially having visited places ourselves. So we know what a Victorian slum looks like. But it's possible, I suppose, that certain elements of a Victorian slum that Dickens might have been describing many people wouldn't really, the people who were reading the books didn't know what that sort of way of life. And I think from a social history, it's invaluable what Dickens wrote, because he's writing detail that clearly would have been accurate. I mean, the plots obviously are fanciful, but the setting was clearly accurate. The workhouses and the way people dressed and the way people would have treated each other and the squalor that people lived in and all of that would have been fairly accurate, I would imagine, because people would have been able to say, well, this is just nonsense. So, yeah. Audrey Forbes Hamilton, Dickens used to sell his stories in installments. Yes, of course. And I suppose that's another way why the books were somewhat longer, because you haven't got the concept of a novel in a book, rather than it being stretched over a series of basically articles in a magazine. The Huxtons family, says Zane. Hello, Zane. Nice to see you there. I'm just about to disappear, actually. Leo Scott says hello. Hello to you. Very kind of you to come along. We've been reading English Journey by J.B. Prestley, and I'm going to go and somehow exercise my poor old back. So thank you for joining me. I will be live again this evening at 8 o'clock British Summer Time here in the UK, which is GMT +1, I think, because we put everything forward, didn't we? Spring forward. And I'm aiming to put together another video for tomorrow morning, this afternoon, edit something together, but I'm not sure what, because I don't think I can walk very far, what with the agony that my back is in. But it will slowly get together. I think the doctors are very busy at the moment. They don't want to see people who've got little bad back incidences. But anyway, there we go. Thank you so much. Look after yourself, and I will catch up with you later on, hopefully on the Vobe Show, which is on the Vobe Show channel. Till then, take care, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.